Resident Evil has produced some of the most iconic villains in gaming history, from calculating scientists who inject themselves with their own creations, to 9-foot-tall stalkers who will not stop following you no matter how many times you shoot them. Today, I'm breaking down the absolute best villains this franchise has ever created, starting with the one who literally wrote the playbook on betrayal, Albert Wesker. If you've played any Resident Evil game in the last 25 years, you already know this name. Albert Wesker is the franchise's original sin. The guy who looked at his own squad, a team that trusted him with their lives, and thought, yeah, I'm going to feed these people to zombies and take notes. Here's the setup. Wesker was the captain of XSTARS Alpha Team in the original Resident Evil, respected leader. Cool sunglasses, the whole package. But behind the shades, he was Umbrella Corporation's double agent, and the entire mansion incident was his idea. Every zombie, every hunter, every nightmare in that building was a live field test, and his own teammates were the lab rats. That alone makes him one of gaming's greatest traitors. But here's where it gets interesting. Wesker was supposed to die in that mansion. Capcom designed him as a disposable one-game villain. He gets killed by the tyrant, credits roll, everyone moves on, except fans wouldn't shut up about him. The reception was so positive that Capcom looked at his corpse and said, actually, he's fine. They retconned his death by revealing he'd injected himself with an experimental virus right before the tyrant fight, granting him superhuman speed, regeneration, and the ability to catch bullets out of the air. And that's where the debate starts. Early Wesker was terrifying because you never knew what he was planning. He was the chess player, always 3 steps ahead. But by Resident Evil 5, Capcom had turned him into a bullet-dodging demigod who could punch through steel and move faster than the human eye could track. He went from mastermind to final boss. And a lot of fans think that's exactly when he stopped being scary. There's something inherently less threatening about a villain you can shoot with a rocket launcher than one who's already planned for the rocket launcher. The more invincible they made him, the more divisive he became. Still, love him or hate him in RE5, the man defined what a Resident Evil villain even is. Every betrayal, every secret experiment, every shadowy figure in this franchise exists because Wesker did it first. But if Wesker built the blueprint for RE villainy, the next guy on our list took that blueprint and injected it with something far, far worse. William Birkin. If Wesker is the guy who chose to become a monster, Birkin is the guy who got cornered into it, and that distinction matters more than people give it credit for. William Birkin was Umbrella's chief virologist, the man who personally created the G-Virus. Not contributed to, not assisted with, created. His own research documents describe the G-Virus as capable of overtaking the T-Virus genetically, which means he built something that could theoretically render Umbrella's entire flagship bioweapon obsolete. He was sitting on the single most dangerous piece of biology the franchise has ever produced, and he knew exactly what it was worth. Umbrella knew too, which is why they sent a retrieval squad to take it from him. Here's where it gets tragic. The squad shoots Birkin and leaves him for dead. A dying man, bleeding out next to his life's work, does the only thing he can think of. He injects himself with the G-Virus. Not because he wanted power, not because he had some master plan, because he was about to die in a hallway and his survival instinct kicked in before his common sense could. What follows is one of the most disturbing transformation arcs in the entire series. Birkin mutates through 4 progressively monstrous forms throughout Resident Evil 2, starting as a partially disfigured scientist with a giant eyeball growing out of his shoulder and ending as a multi-story tentacled abomination that barely resembles anything biological. Each stage strips away more of the man and replaces it with something worse. But the real gut punch isn't what happens to him. It's what he does to his 12-year-old daughter Sherry. Birkin infects Sherry with the G-Virus. The reasoning, if you can even call it that through whatever fractured consciousness he had left, was to protect her from Umbrella, to make her something they couldn't just execute. His greatest scientific achievement becomes the thing that nearly destroys his own child. That's not a mad scientist moment. That's a father making the worst possible decision with the best possible intention. And it gives Resident Evil 2 an emotional core that most horror games never even attempt. The community still argues about whether the G-Virus represents a genuinely superior evolution compared to Wesker's enhancements, or if it's just a less strategically weaponized variant. Honestly, both sides have a point. Birkin's creation was more biologically powerful, but completely uncontrollable, which, if you think about it, is a pretty perfect metaphor for the man himself. He didn't destroy Raccoon City on purpose. He destroyed it because Umbrella tried to steal his life's work and he panicked. But if you think a desperate scientist is scary, wait until you meet the thing Umbrella sent into that city on purpose. Mr. X, T-00. Every other villain on this list has a motivation, a backstory, a reason for doing what they do, Mr. X has a coat and a hat, and somehow that's enough to make him one of the most terrifying things in gaming history. His official designation is T-00, a Tyrant-class bioweapon created by Umbrella using human DNA spliced with the T-virus. He stands about 9 feet tall, weighs God knows how much, and was dropped into Raccoon City with one job: retrieve a sample of the G-virus and kill anything that gets in the way. That's it. That's the entire character. No monologue, no master plan, no tragic origin story where his parents didn't love him enough. Just a 9-foot wall of leather and muscle walking toward you at a pace that somehow feels faster than running. Here's the thing about Mr. X. Conventional weapons do literally nothing to him. Shoot him with a pistol and he stumbles. Maybe. Like you've mildly inconvenienced him. He can demolish reinforced walls with his bare hands, lift multi-ton objects like they're made of styrofoam, and the only things that actually hurt him are specialized anti-bow rounds, industrial acid, or explosives. So your average handgun is basically a suggestion he politely ignores, and yet he became an icon. Zero dialogue, zero character development. His entire threat comes from the sound of footsteps getting closer. That's the anti-Wesker approach, where Wesker needs 5 games of lore, betrayals, and virus cocktails to feel dangerous. Mr. X needs 5 seconds of heavy boots on tile floor. Less is more, and Mr. X is the franchise's proof of concept. His nickname is worth mentioning too. Mr. X was entirely fan-created. Players just started calling him that because his real designation sounds like a printer model. But the name stuck so hard that Capcom's own staff started using it in official communications, which is, kind of beautiful. Now the 2019 RE2 remake turned him into a genuine phenomenon. The redesigned AI meant he could track you through the police station dynamically, showing up in hallways you thought were safe, punching through walls you assumed were solid. Players loved it. Players also hated it. The debate was immediate and intense. Supporters called it the best psychological horror in the franchise. Critics said there's a razor-thin line between I'm terrified and okay dude, I'm trying to solve a puzzle. Can you give me, 30 seconds? And Mr. X walks that line. Literally. He literally walks it at that same unstoppable pace directly into whatever room you're hiding in. But if you think a silent stalker in a fedora is scary, wait until Umbrella gives one a rocket launcher and teaches it to say your name. Nemesis. Mr. X is terrifying because he won't stop. Nemesis is terrifying because he's getting better at finding you. That's the difference, and it's everything. Standing 8 feet tall and weighing over 500 pounds, Nemesis isn't just another tyrant. He's a specialized hunter-killer engineered by Umbrella's European facility with one job: eliminate every surviving STARS member. Not cause chaos, not guard the facility. Find specific trained operatives and put them in the ground. He's basically a 500-pound hitman with a learning disability in the opposite direction. Here's the thing. Mr. X tracks you through brute force. He walks in a direction, and if you're there, bad news. Nemesis tracks you through problem solving. He modifies pursuit routes. He adapts to your escape patterns. He processes environmental puzzles to cut you off. Every time you survive an encounter with this thing, it's taking notes. Oh, she went left last time. Cool. I'll be waiting left this time. That's not a zombie. That's a counterintelligence operative wrapped in 500 pounds of bioweapon. But the real stroke of genius is the weapon. Nemesis shoulders a rocket launcher during his pursuit in the original RE3. Not a pistol, not a knife, a rocket launcher. This thing is already faster than you, stronger than you, and smarter than every other bioweapon in the franchise. And Umbrella decided to also give it explosive ordnance. No cutscene explains this, no character comments on it. The game just communicates escalating danger purely through mechanical design. You see this giant sprinting at you with a rocket launcher and your stomach drops because you understand exactly what it means. He's not just chasing you, he's armed specifically to kill you as efficiently as possible, which is, not ideal. And he can talk, not eloquently, not in full sentences, but the fact that this thing can vocalize STARS while sprinting through a wall to get to you elevates him from monster to something far worse. Monsters don't know your name. Now, the RE3 remake. This is where it gets complicated. The original Nemesis could appear almost anywhere. You'd be solving a puzzle, exploring a room you thought was safe, and suddenly he's there. The dread wasn't in the encounters themselves, it was in the spaces between them. The constant knowledge that he could show up at any moment turned every hallway into a potential death trap. The remake traded that psychological horror for scripted action sequences. Big, cinematic, visually impressive set pieces where you knew exactly when Nemesis would appear, because the game told you. Fans noticed immediately. The unpredictable hunter became a predictable spectacle. It looked better. It felt worse. Sometimes the scariest thing a game can do is let you imagine what's around the corner instead of showing you. But if Nemesis represents Umbrella's attempt to weaponize Pursuit itself, the Ashford family took a completely different approach to biological horror, one rooted in aristocracy, obsession, and a 15-year nap. Alexia Ashford. Most Resident Evil villains get their power handed to them. A corporation injects them, Parasite controls them, or they stumble into something they don't fully understand. Alexia Ashford looked at all of that and said, "No thanks, I'll do it myself," at age 12. Here's the thing about Alexia that makes her completely different from every other name on this list. She's not a soldier, she's not a lab rat, she's not even really a villain in the traditional sense. She's an aristocrat, the heiress to the Ashford biotech dynasty, a child prodigy who graduated university before most kids finish middle school, and she decided that godhood was a reasonable career goal. The scary part? She had the money and the intellect to actually try it. While other Umbrella scientists were tinkering with existing strains, Alexia personally engineered a specialized T-virus variant that incorporated insectoid DNA. Not modified, not adapted, built from scratch. She created chimeric mutations that could transform a human body into something resembling a queen ant, complete with chitinous armor, multiple limbs, and regenerative biology that made every previous bioweapon look like a rough draft. And then she did something that still gets brought up in every conversation about her character. She infected herself with it at 12 years old. But here's where it gets genuinely fascinating. The virus needed 15 years to properly bond with her biology without destroying her mind. So Alexia, being the kind of person who plans everything, put herself into cryogenic suspension. She literally went to sleep for a decade and a half, waking up at 27 in Resident Evil Code Veronica, fully transformed and ready to rule. She didn't stumble into power. She scheduled it. When she finally wakes up, she's commanding an underground kingdom where devoted followers worship her as a godlike figure. Not because she threatened them or infected them against their will, but because she was genuinely that impressive. An aristocrat whose unlimited resources and scientific obsession made her more dangerous than anyone at Umbrella's actual leadership table. She wasn't taking orders. She was the one everyone should have been afraid of, and yet Capcom has done absolutely nothing with her since. Community consensus consistently names Alexia as one of Resident Evil's most underrated female antagonists, and fans bring up her absence from modern entries and remakes constantly. She has the backstory, the visual design, the transformation sequences, and the thematic depth to anchor an entire modern game. A child prodigy aristocrat who engineered her own evolution into a god and then took a 15-year nap to make sure it worked? That's not a side character. That's a franchise centerpiece collecting dust. But if you think a self-made god with an ant army is theatrical, wait until you meet the tiny aristocrat with a Napoleon complex and a castle full of parasites. Ramon Salazar. Let me introduce you to the most underrated villain in Resident Evil 4. Ramon Salazar is the 8th Castellan of Castle Salazar, a Spanish nobleman who commands an entire medieval fortress, controls an army of infected villagers and armored guards, and speaks to you like he's hosting a dinner party you weren't invited to. He's roughly 20 years old. He acts like he's 200, and he has absolutely zero idea that he's not actually in charge of anything. Here's the thing about Salazar. On the surface, he's almost comedic. He's this tiny, theatrical aristocrat throwing tantrums from his throne room, monologuing at Leon like he's performing Shakespeare for an audience of parasites. He's got the posture of a man who's never been told no in his life and the self-awareness of a goldfish. Every interaction with him feels like you're being trash-talked by a rich kid who's never been in a real fight. "I've sent my right hand to dispose of you," he says, like he's ordering room service. But here's where it gets disturbing. Salazar isn't running anything. He was implanted with a Plaga egg as a child, reportedly at his own mother's request, by Los Illuminados cultists who wanted access to the parasites sealed beneath his family's castle, which means his entire personality, his loyalty to the cult, his obsession with stopping Leon, all of it is the parasite talking. He thinks he's a powerful cult leader commanding his ancestral home. In reality, he's a spoiled kid whose brain got hijacked by a worm before he was old enough to understand what was happening. His noble title, his family legacy, his entire sense of identity, none of it belongs to him anymore. He's a puppet who thinks he's pulling the strings, which is, not ideal. And then comes the transformation, because when you finally corner Salazar, he doesn't just fight you, he splits open. His body merges with a massive parasitic organism, creating a 30-plus foot centipede creature with Salazar's humanoid upper body perched on top of a grotesque insectoid lower half, controlling the whole thing like the world's worst parade float. It's one of the most visually inventive boss designs in the entire franchise. The scale alone is staggering. One minute you're trading quips with a guy who looks like he weighs 90 pounds. The next, you're staring up at a biological nightmare that fills the entire chamber. Fans consistently overlook Salazar in greatest villain conversations, and honestly, it makes no sense. They'll rank Sadler higher because he's the real mastermind, but Salazar is the one who actually makes SAR E4's middle act memorable. His theatrical arrogance gives you someone to laugh at. His transformation gives you something to be genuinely horrified by. That contrast between the ridiculous little aristocrat and the absolute body horror of what he becomes is pure Resident Evil at its most creative. He's the villain nobody takes seriously until he peels apart into something that weighs more than a truck. But if Salazar is the puppet, then it's time we talk about the man holding the strings. The guy who infected an entire region of Spain and genuinely believes a parasite is humanity's next evolutionary step, Osmond Sadler. Every Resident Evil villain before this guy wanted something simple: money, power, a promotion, maybe a god complex wrapped in a lab coat. Osmond Sadler doesn't want any of that. Osmond Sadler wants to save your soul, and that's exactly what makes him one of the most unsettling antagonists the franchise has ever produced. Sadler is the chief priest and founder of Los Iluminados, a religious cult operating out of rural Spain that managed to weaponize an ancient parasitic organism called the Plaga. And when I say weaponize, I mean he infected basically the entire surrounding population. Farmers, villagers, local nobility, all converted into a hive mind network that he controls through a hierarchical nervous system linked directly to his master parasite. He's not running a corporation. He's running a congregation, one where the exit doors are permanently welded shut. But here's the thing. Sadler doesn't try to kill Leon Kennedy. He tries to convert him. He infects the president's daughter, Ashley Graham, with a control plaga, not as a hostage play, but as bait. The entire rescue mission is engineered so that Leon walks deeper and deeper into Sadler's territory, gradually exposing himself to infection. Most villains would just put a bullet in the hero and call it a day. Sadler wants him to join the family, which is, no, not ideal. And throughout all of this, the man is calm, disturbingly calm, but he delivers philosophical monologues about humanity's weakness and the Plaga's divine gift, like he's giving a Sunday sermon to people who didn't realize they'd already been baptized. Standing 6'4" with this unnaturally elongated frame that already looks wrong before any transformation happens, Sadler just quietly explains why parasitic enslavement is actually the best thing that could happen to the human race. He's not ranting in a control room. He's not scheming behind a desk. He genuinely believes every single word. That's the difference between Sadler and everyone who came before him. Wesker wanted control. Birkin wanted legacy. Sadler wants salvation. He's a missionary with a bioweapon, and he sincerely thinks he's doing you a favor. Then you get to the final fight, and the man becomes appropriately biblical. His transformation produces a 40-plus foot-winged creature with a full insectoid exoskeleton, multiple limbs, and regenerative biology that makes every previous boss encounter look like a warm-up round. It's enormous, it's grotesque, and it fits perfectly, because Sadler was never going to go out looking like a scientist who made a miscalculation. He goes out looking like something ripped directly from the Book of Revelation, a false prophet ascending to his final form. Sadler represents a genuine turning point for the franchise. Before him, Resident Evil villains were products of corporate arrogance and scientific hubris. After him, the series opened the door to zealots, cultists, and true believers who don't need a profit motive to justify atrocity. He proved that a calm man with genuine conviction could be scarier than any tyrant in a trench coat, because you can't reason with someone who already thinks they've found the answer. But if Sadler shifted the franchise toward ideological horror, the next villain on this list dragged it somewhere even more uncomfortable, straight through someone's front door. Jack Baker. Every Resident Evil villain up to this point had one thing in common. They were products of a system. Corporate labs, underground facilities, billion-dollar research programs. Jack Baker is just a dad from Louisiana, and that's exactly why he's terrifying. Before the mold found him, Jack Baker was nobody special. A working-class Southern patriarch living with his family in Dulvey, Louisiana, the kind of guy who'd fix your truck and invite you in for dinner. Then a parasitic mold organism infected him, and that dinner invitation became a death sentence. He stands 6 feet 2 inches tall with a muscular build that progressively deteriorates into something barely recognizable as human. Fungal growths spreading across his skin, tissue discoloring into gray and black patches, his body becoming less of a body and more of a vessel for something that that doesn't care about the man it used to be. Here's where it gets complicated for anyone trying to fight him. Jack doesn't die. You shoot him, he gets back up. You blow him apart with explosives at point-blank range, he regenerates. You sever a limb, it grows back. The mold grants him a kind of distributed biological immortality that makes every previous Resident Evil boss fight feel like a polite disagreement. He can vomit caustic acidic bile that dissolves organic material and inorganic structures, which is, not ideal when you're trapped in his house with nothing but a pocket knife and a dream. But the real genius of Jack Baker isn't his regeneration, it's the context. This isn't a secret underground lab. There's no corporate conspiracy briefing. You're in a family home, you're sitting at their dinner table, and the thing trying to kill you looks like somebody's father because he is somebody's father. The horror isn't genetic engineering, it's a family dinner gone wrong, and the Bakers function as something the series had never attempted before. His wife Marguerite becomes a major boss encounter. His adult son Lucas becomes another. The entire family unit is the threat. You're not clearing floors of a research facility and fighting one big creature at the end. You're surviving a household where every single member wants you dead, and each one has their own grotesque method of making that happen. It's a distributed boss system disguised as domestic life. That's what made RE7's tonal shift actually work. The franchise had been drifting further and further into action territory, and Jack Baker dragged it back into horror by doing something deceptively simple. He made the villain relatable, not sympathetic in the moment, obviously. The man is trying to shove your face into a wall, but underneath all the mold and the madness, there's a tragedy, a regular person consumed by something he never asked for, turned against the family he loved. Umbrella's super soldiers could never achieve that kind of emotional weight because they were never human enough to lose anything. Jack Baker proved that Resident Evil didn't need a corporation, a cult, or a global conspiracy to be scary. Sometimes all you need is a dad, a dinner table, and something very wrong growing in the walls. But if Jack Baker redefined what a Resident Evil villain could be, the woman pulling strings behind RE8 took that redefinition and turned it into something ancient, deceptive, and far more dangerous than any single family. Mother Miranda. Mother Miranda is the most frustrating villain in Resident Evil history. Not because she's bad, because she's incredible on paper and barely exists in practice. Here's the concept. A centuries-old shapeshifter who predates modern bioweapons by hundreds of years, running a parasitic cult that controls an entire village through 4 uniquely terrifying lieutenants. She can take the form of anyone she wants. She can sprout massive bat-like wings spanning over 12 feet, and she's been pulling strings since before Umbrella was even a logo on a briefcase. That's one of the most ambitious villain concepts this franchise has ever attempted, and the game does almost nothing with it. Let me explain. Mother Miranda is the primary antagonist of Resident Evil 8, Village. She orchestrates the kidnapping of Rosemary Winters to harvest her DNA for purposes tied to ancient parasitic organisms, basically trying to resurrect her dead daughter through Rose's unique biological makeup. She commands the 4 lords, Lady Dimitrescu, Donna Beneviento, Karl Heisenberg, and Salvatore Moreau, maintaining control through parasitic implants and a combination of ideological loyalty and raw fear. Every single horror you encounter in the village traces back to her. Every lord, every creature, every nightmare, all Miranda. But here's the thing, you barely see her. The 4 lords steal the entire game out from under her. They get the screen time, they get the memorable encounters, they get the character development. Miranda shows up, shapeshifts a couple of times to deceive both Ethan and the player, delivers some monologues about ancient parasites and maternal grief, and then transforms into this massive, multi-segmented, angelic demonic creature for the final boss fight, which looks cool, sure. Distributed regenerative segments, wings, the whole spectacle, but by that point you've spent the entire game bonding with her subordinates, not her. The irony is genuinely painful. She commands 4 of the most visually memorable antagonists in modern Resident Evil history, and most players couldn't tell you a single specific thing she said. They remember Heisenberg's rants. They remember Beneviento's house. They definitely remember Dimitrescu. Miranda, she's the answer to a trivia question about who the actual final boss was, and the ancient cult angle connecting her to pre-Umbrella bioweapon history? Fascinating, completely unexplored. The game hints that her work with parasitic organisms predates industrial civilization, that she was manipulating biology centuries before anyone coined the term bioweapon. That's lore that could recontextualize the entire franchise timeline. Instead, it gets maybe 2 minutes of exposition. The community is split right down the middle on her. Supporters point to her narrative manipulation, the way she actively deceives the player about the true nature of RE8's threat, functioning as a meta-villain who rewrites the story around you. That's genuinely clever design. Critics counter that clever design means nothing if the character gets less development than any one of her 4 servants. Both sides are right, which is the most annoying part. Mother Miranda is the villain who needed a sequel more than anyone in this franchise. She needed a game where she was the focus, not the figure behind the curtain who steps out for 5 minutes at the end. The concept deserved better, the lore deserved better, and honestly, the player deserved better too. But if you think Miranda got overshadowed, wait until you meet the subordinate who didn't just steal her spotlight, but became one of the biggest cultural phenomena in gaming history, Lady Dimitrescu. No villain on this list broke the internet. Lady Dimitrescu did. Her full name is Alcina Dimitrescu, and she stands at an officially documented 9 feet 6 inches tall. That's 289 centimeters according to the game files, making her one of the largest humanoid antagonists in Resident Evil history. She's a castle-dwelling aristocrat who drains blood from her victims and processes it into wine-like products that she and her daughters consume on a regular basis, which is, not ideal for the victims. But here's the thing about Lady Dimitrescu. She's not the final boss of Resident Evil 8. She's not even the primary antagonist. That title belongs to Mother Miranda, who controls Dimitrescu and the other 3 lords through parasitic implants. Dimitrescu operates with significant autonomy inside her castle walls, commanding 3 insectoid daughters whose distributed consciousness is biologically linked to hers through parasitic networks. She runs her domain like a blood-harvesting wine empire with a dress code, but in the grand hierarchy of Village's villain structure, she's technically a subordinate, and yet she became the most talked about Resident Evil character in over a decade. The moment Capcom revealed her design, the internet lost its collective mind. A 9'6" vampire aristocrat in a white dress and wide-brimmed hat, stalking you through a gothic castle while her bug daughters try to eat you alive. The memes were instantaneous. The fan art was relentless. She trended globally before the game even launched. Her popularity was so unprecedented that Capcom developed dedicated DLC content, the Castle Dimitrescu scenario, specifically in response to player demand. That almost never happens. A secondary antagonist generating enough cultural momentum to reshape a game's post-launch content strategy is virtually unheard of in franchise history. But this is where the debate gets interesting, because the community has been arguing about Lady Dimitrescu ever since. The question isn't whether she's popular. Obviously she's popular. The question is whether she's actually a great villain or just a great design. Her backstory is thinner than most entries on this list. She doesn't have Wesker's decades of manipulation. She doesn't have Jack Baker's tragic humanity. She doesn't have Nemesis's mechanical terror. What she has is presence, an immediately iconic silhouette, a castle full of blood wine, and an energy that resonated with millions of people who had never touched a Resident Evil game in their lives. Some fans argue her viral fame actually damaged Village's narrative by eclipsing Mother Miranda entirely. Miranda was supposed to be the big bad, the mastermind pulling every string, but nobody was making fan art of Mother Miranda. Nobody was demanding Mother Miranda DLC. The spotlight got stolen by a character who occupies maybe a quarter of the game's runtime, and the intended final villain never recovered from it. Others argue that's exactly why she belongs on a list like this. Lady Dimitrescu proved something that no other Resident Evil villain has proven. A villain doesn't need 5 games of lore, a tragic backstory, or a world-ending scheme to become iconic. Sometimes a 9'6" vampire aristocrat with a wine cellar full of human blood is enough. She transcended her own game. She transcended the franchise. She became a cultural fixture that people who have never played a single Resident Evil title can identify on sight. So does a villain need depth to be great? Or does cultural immortality speak for itself? I don't know what to tell you, but I do know that every single villain on this list, from Wesker to Nemesis to Sadler, existed inside the games that made them. Lady Dimitrescu is the only one who escaped. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.